And we're going to start being smart, and we're going to start being very wealthy again. We're going to be wealthy as a country because they've taken so much of our wealth.
Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum, the most powerful woman in the world.
Mexico has launched a powerful counterattack against President Trump's tariffs that nobody saw coming. What started as another Trump trade threat has transformed into a masterclass in strategic resistance by Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. When Trump slapped a 25% tariff on all Mexican imports, claiming it was necessary to combat drug trafficking and illegal immigration, most expected Mexico to cave under pressure. Instead, President Sheinbaum stood before her nation and announced a comprehensive package of retaliatory measures that will target billions in American exports. There is no reason or justification that supports this decision, Sheinbaum declared from Mexico's National Palace. We will respond with tariff and non-tariff measures. Her government has scheduled a major announcement for Sunday in Mexico City's historic Zócalo plaza, where she'll reveal the full list of American products to be hit with counter-tariffs. What makes this confrontation so extraordinary is Mexico's calculated approach. Rather than rushing to announce retaliatory measures, Sheinbaum has methodically built national unity, engaged with business leaders, and positioned Mexico as the reasonable party in this dispute. She's even secured unexpected support from Canada, creating a united North American front against Trump's trade aggression. The stakes couldn't be higher. With over $800 billion in annual trade between the US and Mexico, this isn't just another border dispute, it's a fundamental challenge to Trump's belief that he can bully America's neighbors without consequences. And for the first time, Mexico isn't backing down. Tonight, we examine how Mexico's bold counter-strategy could reshape North American trade relations, potentially forcing Trump to reconsider his approach and demonstrating that even America's most dependent trading partners are no longer willing to accept unilateral pressure. To understand why Mexico's response is so significant, we need to look at what's actually at stake in this trade confrontation. Mexico and the United States share one of the most integrated economic relationships in the world. In 2024, total trade between the two countries reached a record-breaking $840 billion, making Mexico the United States' largest trading partner for the second consecutive year. Every day, nearly $2.3 billion worth of goods cross the border in both directions. When Trump announced his 25% tariff on all Mexican imports, he struck at the foundation of both economies. These tariffs affect everything from cars and electronics to agricultural products and medical devices. According to economic analysts, they could cost American consumers billions of dollars in higher prices and potentially trigger a recession in Mexico. But instead of accepting this punishment, Mexico has chosen to fight back with unprecedented resolve. President Sheinbaum's approach has been remarkably strategic, combining firm resistance with continued openness to dialogue. We will always seek a negotiated solution, she said, while adding that she expects to speak with Trump by phone later this week. This balanced stance has won her approval ratings above 80% at home and respect from international observers. What's truly remarkable about Mexico's stance is how quickly it abandoned its traditionally cautious approach to US relations. For decades, Mexico has been economically dependent on the United States, with roughly 80% of its exports going to its northern neighbor. This dependence created an unequal relationship, where Mexico often had to accept American demands. But Sheinbaum has fundamentally changed this dynamic. I call on the Mexican people to face this challenge together, to remain united, she declared. It is time to defend Mexico and its sovereignty. This call for national unity has resonated deeply across Mexican society. Opposition politicians, business leaders, and civil society organizations have all rallied behind the government's response. Even critics of Sheinbaum's administration have praised her handling of the crisis. The Mexican Business Council, representing the country's largest corporations, issued a statement supporting the government's position and pledging to help find alternative markets for Mexican products. This is not a partisan issue, said the council's president. This is about defending Mexico's economic interests and dignity. But what exactly is Mexico threatening to do? The options being discussed in Mexico City are far more extensive than simple counter-tariffs on American corn or soybeans. First, Mexico is considering targeted tariffs on agricultural products from states that strongly supported Trump in the last election. This would hit key Trump constituencies in rural America, creating political pressure on the White House. Products like corn, soybeans, pork, and dairy from states like Iowa, Nebraska, and Wisconsin could face tariffs of up to 25%. Second, Mexico could restrict cooperation on immigration enforcement, the very issue Trump claims to be addressing with his tariffs. Despite Trump's accusations, Mexico has actually been taking significant steps to reduce migration to the US border, including deploying 10,000 additional troops. Scaling back these efforts would immediately increase pressure on the US immigration system. Third, Mexico could limit cooperation on drug enforcement. Just last week, Mexico extradited high-profile cartel leaders to the United States, including a notorious kingpin wanted for decades over the murder of a US undercover agent. Reducing this cooperation would undermine Trump's stated goal of combating drug trafficking. Fourth, and perhaps most significantly, Mexico could redirect its trade toward other partners. While finding alternatives to the US market would take time, Mexico has free trade agreements with 50 countries, including the European Union, Japan, and the members of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. The potential economic impact of this confrontation is enormous. American companies have invested heavily in Mexico, with supply chains that cross the border multiple times during production. Major US automakers like Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis depend on Mexican factories and components. If these supply chains are disrupted by tariffs and counter-tariffs, the costs would be enormous. For the United States, the stakes are particularly high. American farmers export billions of dollars worth of corn, soybeans, and meat to Mexico each year. If these exports face retaliatory tariffs, many already struggling farm operations could face bankruptcy. Moreover, higher prices for Mexican imports would hit American consumers directly. From avocados and tomatoes to cars and medical devices, Mexican products are deeply embedded in American daily life. A 25% price increase on these goods would fuel inflation and reduce purchasing power for millions of Americans. But Mexico is taking a calculated risk as well. While its economy is more diversified than in the past, a prolonged trade conflict with the United States would undoubtedly cause significant pain. Mexican manufacturers would still face challenges selling in the US market, even as they sought to retaliate against American companies. This is why some observers believe that Mexico's tough talk is primarily a negotiating tactic, a way to strengthen its position before eventually seeking a compromise. But others see a more fundamental shift occurring, with Mexico increasingly willing to assert its economic interests, even at the cost of the bilateral relationship. But there's a deeper strategic game being played here that goes beyond just economics. Mexico's bold stance against US tariffs represents a fundamental shift in North American power dynamics. Since the signing of NAFTA in 1994 and its replacement with the USMCA in 2020, Mexico has been deeply integrated into the North American economy. This integration brought benefits but also vulnerabilities, as Mexico became increasingly dependent on access to the US market. Trump exploited this dependency during his first term, threatening tariffs to force Mexico to increase immigration enforcement. Mexico largely complied with these demands, fearing the economic consequences of US tariffs. But something fundamental has changed. Under President Sheinbaum, Mexico is no longer willing to accept this unequal relationship. Her administration has calculated that the short-term pain of standing up to the United States is worth the long-term gain of establishing Mexico as a sovereign equal, not a subordinate. This shift in Mexican thinking has profound implications for the future of North American relations. As the second-largest economy in Latin America and a nation of 130 million people, Mexico has the potential to serve as a counterweight to US influence in the region, especially if it can build stronger ties with other major economies. The timing of this confrontation is particularly significant given broader global trends. China is expanding its influence in Latin America, Europe is seeking more independent trade policies, and emerging economies are increasingly unwilling to follow US leadership uncritically. In this context, Mexico's defiance could accelerate the transition from a US-dominated hemisphere to a more balanced system where several powers compete and cooperate on more equal terms. What makes Mexico's position even stronger is the unexpected support it has received from Canada. Despite their many differences, Canada and Mexico find themselves united in opposition to Trump's tariff threats. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has expressed solidarity with Mexico and implemented his own retaliatory measures against US tariffs. This North American unity, minus the United States, represents a nightmare scenario for Washington. The USMCA was designed to cement US economic leadership in North America. Instead, it may have created a framework within which Canada and Mexico can coordinate their resistance to US pressure. For the Trump administration, Mexico's defiance presents a serious challenge. The White House had likely calculated that Mexico would ultimately back down in the face of American pressure, as it has often done in the past. Instead, Trump now faces the prospect of a prolonged economic conflict with America's largest trading partner. The administration's response so far has been to double down on its tough approach. Trump has threatened that if Mexico retaliates against his tariffs, he will impose even higher tariffs in response. This escalatory rhetoric suggests that the White House either doesn't understand or doesn't care about the potential costs of a full-scale trade war with Mexico. But Mexico appears equally determined to stand its ground. Economy Secretary Raquel Buenrostro has warned that we will not hesitate to defend our national interests, while Foreign Minister Juan Ramón de la Fuente has emphasized that such high tariffs would have devastating consequences for both our economies. This standoff has created a dangerous dynamic where neither side wants to appear weak by backing down first. The risk of miscalculation is high, with relatively minor trade measures potentially spiraling into a much broader economic conflict. For ordinary citizens on both sides of the border, the consequences could be severe. American consumers would face higher prices for Mexican goods, from cars and electronics to fruits and vegetables. Mexican workers in export industries could face layoffs if US tariffs significantly reduce demand for Mexican products. The integrated supply chains that cross the US-Mexico border multiple times would be particularly vulnerable. A car assembled in Mexico might contain components from the United States that crossed the border several times during production. With tariffs applied each time goods cross the border, the final product could become significantly more expensive. Yet despite these risks, there are reasons to believe that Mexico's bold stance might ultimately lead to a more balanced and sustainable bilateral relationship. By demonstrating that it's willing and able to respond forcefully to American economic pressure, Mexico is creating incentives for the United States to return to a more cooperative approach to trade. If Washington realizes that unilateral tariffs will be met with equivalent or greater countermeasures, it may eventually conclude that negotiation is preferable to confrontation. Moreover, Mexico's leadership in standing up to US tariffs could strengthen Latin American unity at a time when the region has been struggling with internal divisions. If other Latin American nations rally behind Mexico, the region could emerge as a more cohesive and powerful global actor. In the longer term, a more balanced relationship between the United States and Mexico, one based on mutual respect rather than American dominance, could actually benefit both sides. It could lead to fairer trade practices, more sustainable economic growth, and more effective cooperation on shared challenges like migration, security, and climate change. The key question now is whether leaders on both sides of the border can find a way to de-escalate the current confrontation before it causes lasting damage to the bilateral relationship and both economies. Some observers believe that behind the tough public rhetoric, diplomats are already working on potential compromises. These might include partial exemptions from tariffs, agreements on specific sectors, or broader deals that address both sides' concerns about migration and security. But with Trump's unpredictable approach to foreign policy and Mexico's newfound determination to defend its economic interests, the path to such compromises will not be easy. The coming weeks and months will test whether the North American economic partnership can withstand the strain of serious conflict. What's clear is that Mexico's bold response to US tariffs marks a turning point in bilateral relations. The era of unquestioned American dominance in North America is ending, and a new, more balanced relationship is emerging. How this transition unfolds will depend largely on the choices made in Washington and Mexico City in the days and weeks ahead. What do you think about Mexico's bold stance against Trump's tariffs? Is this the beginning of a dangerous trade war that will hurt both countries, or a necessary step toward a more balanced relationship? Will Trump back down in the face of Mexican resistance, or double down with even more aggressive measures? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this analysis helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth coverage of global economics and politics. We'll be following this story closely as it develops. Thanks for watching.